Hey, everybody, welcome back to University of Adversity. I'm your host, Lance Ecios. We have such a great conversation for you today. I'm just so blessed to be able to bring amazing humans like this and share their stories with you guys because isn't that really what it's all about? We're going through challenging times in our lives, and to hear somebody who's gone through things, overcome them, and be able to give you some insight into your life and provide you with some tools that you can use when you're in challenging situations. It's really what it's all about, right? And we talk about this in the episode about, when it comes to the adversity you face, all what really matters is how do you respond to it, and how do you show up? How long do you stay in the shit before you, kind of bounce back in control of your emotions and basically in control of the driver's seat of your life. It's so easy, especially nowadays, to react emotionally, and to be able to have tools that can kind of give us our power back is really why this show exists. And today, I had an amazing gentleman join us today. His name is, he goes by J.H. Parker, also known as John Henry, and he's an incredible human being. And let me give you a little bit of insight into who he is and what he has done in this incredible journey he's been on. He's a behavioral assessment analyst, an author who writes about trauma, grief, loss, and personal transformation. He is a former U.S. Marine and the son of a Marine Korean War combat veteran and an Air Force photographer in Vietnam. His son, Danny, was an Army combat veteran and Purple Heart recipient who served 2 tours in Afghanistan with 10th Mountain Division. Tragically, Danny had died in a high-speed, adrenaline-seeking motorcycle accident after completing his military service. It's important to note that John also lost his brother to a motorcycle accident. So he's been through a lot. He's also gone through an incredible amount of abuse as a child. I wanted to note that. And we talk about that in the episode. Through his writings, John is passionate about helping people who suffer from grief, loss, and trauma, including families who support the care for them. He brings reality-based insights to the field of recovery and mental health. He's got a brand new book out that I just read that is freaking amazing. And it took me on such a journey. And I'm not just saying that because this book is actually awesome. And the journey that you go on that's just it. It's a journey. There's so many levels of his story, but it's also really entertaining, and how he went through such challenging things in his life, discovered personal development, how he had this amazing Aunt Gladys who was like his guardian angel when he was a kid, and giving him this insight into what's possible, and really instilled these values about life into him at a young boy that guided him through his life, through plant medicine, through really amazing other transformational tools, including Native American rituals like vision quests, sweat lodges, that kind of stuff. And he's just been on a journey. And the book that he wrote is called Be the Dawn in the Darkness, the relentless pursuit of becoming who you are meant to be. And that's what he has been, is relentless to becoming who he is meant to be. And I hope that you guys, as listeners of this show, are the same. And I know that you are. John was the perfect guest for this show. And I think you guys are going to learn a lot. He's got a ton of insight into this entire world of personal transformation. He's also got another book called Transitioning Veterans. It's a short audiobook that is really helpful also. And, just the whole topic on veterans, they've such a, when you're in that world in the Army, it's such, I can't speak for it because I never have, but what I see from the outside is that it's such a rigid, hard life. And to be able to come into society is really challenging for people. And I was thinking about that as I was reading this book, and I listened to a lot of it while I was in the sauna, actually. because my brain starts to work. And I was just thinking about just how difficult that must be to go from that army mentality to real life, or not real life, but it's to transition into like modern life society, and to be compassionate and to kind of like be able to open your heart. And you can see a lot of people suffer from PTSD, including John. And it's interesting for me to see what people were able to do, like how some people were able to overcome the addiction, overcome the trauma, and some weren't. And that's what really fascinates me about the human experience, is how some people can get through it and some people can't. And today's conversation, I'm really confident you guys will be inspired. So without further ado, enjoy the episode. J.H. Parker coming right up. John, we're doing it. Welcome to University of Adversity. I'm so excited to have you on, my man.
Same here, man. I've been looking forward to it.
Yeah. So your story is kind of what this show is made for, and with your book, Be the Dawn of the Darkness, the relentless pursuit of becoming who we are meant to be, was just such a powerful journey in so many ways. And it literally took me on a journey, and there were so many things there in that book that I could resonate with, and stuff that I had to be like, wow, how does somebody get out of that shit? Like some of the stuff that you went through. And there's so much there, but before we dive into like the meat of the book and everything and talking about your story, why did you want to write this book? Like what was the feeling behind it that really inspired you to want to write this book and share this with the world?
Well, it really started as a therapeutic writing. I've been through a lot in my life, and I found that when I wrote about what I've been through and what I've learned, there was a therapeutic benefit. Like I found that I could make sense of things when I could see it on paper, and it helped me process a lot of unresolved trauma. So it started as just a lot of little pieces of writing over 30 years that it got more clear. The more I did my work on myself, the more I really looked at my own transformation, the better the quality the writing became. And I would never share this with the world. This was just terrible things that I wouldn't tell anybody. If you knew about this, imposter syndrome. Okay. So there's a big part of me that never wanted this to see the light of day. And like my journals kind of thing.
Right.
And then I was watching a really interesting documentary called Finding Joe. And I'd been flipping through Netflix for quite a long time. I kept seeing this Finding Joe. I'm like, what in the world is that? So finally I looked at it. And it's actually about finding Joseph Campbell, who was a writer. And he studied all the different oral histories of tribes and cultures and Native Americans, and just really developed a sense of these common themes that every culture, every tribe that's ever existed has in their oral history and their storytelling. And it all has to do with this hero's journey. And I was fascinated by it. And I was watching it on my video, on my computer while I was traveling. So I captured a screenshot of the hero's journey graphic. And I sat down and I thought, I wonder what my story is. And I put it in PowerPoint. I started creating little snippets, and I put my life in the same chronological arc of the hero's journey. And that became my table of contents. So I was really fascinated. So I just started writing about the easiest stuff first, and I just saved the really bad stuff for the very last. And it turned into a book. And I even wrote it under somebody else's name to just get it out. Like, I'm not really putting this out there still, right? And if I did, it'd be under somebody else's name, So I had to go through these phases of like my own reflection about why am I holding back, and am I willing to be willing? Because I was really unwilling to put this out.
Right.
So that's kind of that's how it came about and turned into what it is.
Yeah, it's like that. It's kind of like you have to apply the work that you've been doing in that action itself, right? Like when you're writing the book and then sharing it, it's like, oh shit. Like sometimes you have to, it becomes a lot harder because it is, especially when you write a book like yours where you go so deep and you're so vulnerable. It's like it's one thing to write it, then it's like, oh wait a minute, there's people that are going to read this thing. It's like, and it's out there, right?
It's true. It's real. It's terror. It's panic. It's all these things that keep you up late at night. But part of me is about go first. Like, I really work with a lot of people over the years that have trauma. And, one of the things that I love most about it is I'm not a licensed therapist. I can tell people about struggle. I've been through struggle. I understand fear and trauma and self-loathing and depression and anxiety and major trauma. So I can talk about it, and it develops a level of neutrality and rapport that leads to trust pretty quickly. So other people can open up and talk about what's going on for them. So I thought it has a lot to do with a matriarch in my family that was highly influential in my upbringing as a young boy. And so really this is as much of a tribute to my Aunt Gladys, my great Aunt Gladys, we called her Glad, as it is to anything else. She is the one, when I was 5 years old and then 6 and 7 and 8 years old, she told me that I was going to do extraordinary things with my life. And I believed her because she said it. And she had that much power of, like, she could see the future, And so it helped me through the worst of times.
Yeah, because your dad was very hard on you, abusive, and just thinking about what it's like to be a kid and having to deal with just not trying to predict like what behavior, which which version of him you're gonna get. And I could really, like, when you're talking about that in the book, I was like, oh man, the poor little guy, like, because
Yeah.
it's such a challenging thing when you're a kid, because also you don't have a filter, you don't know right from wrong, you don't have anything to compare it to, right? But the thing is here is that you had Aunt Glad, so you had this like this voice of reason, this love that was like shining love on you and giving you, and it was so beautiful, like the stuff that you two would do together and how she would help you realize what courage is, and like really give you this confidence that had to have helped you so much, right? Like when you think back about that, like how different do you think it would have been if you didn't have somebody like that? And just in general with people, having that one person that believes in you and that's like there in your corner, and just how important that is.
Well, my wife says it really well. She didn't save my life. She provisioned me to save my own life. No shit.
That's beautiful.
Like, she provisioned me to save my own life. Like the little nuggets of wisdom, like, you're going to be an adult someday. Do you think about being an adult someday, being free from your father and all this? And I'm like, all the time. And that's all I thought about, And so she reminded me that it's going to be coming up. You're going to be on your own. You got to focus on who you want to become. And because she knew my father was so violent with my whole family, he was an alcoholic. He was a Korean War, Marine Corps combat veteran, and he was in Vietnam, had a lot of bad things happen there too. And so she was provisioning me for the hero's journey ahead early on. And one of the best things that she did that changed my whole life was she made me focus on that someday I would be a father,
Mm.
and how would I want to treat my children. And we made a promise to each other one morning that I would never hit my children in anger, and I would never have them live in fear of me. And we bonded, and I made that promise to her. And then when my son was 8 years old, he and I made that same promise, and we never broke it. And so on my dad's side of the family, it's a violent, the men are all violent, a lot of veterans, a lot of trauma, a lot of really bad experiences. It doesn't excuse abuse, does not excuse abuse. And they were extremely abusive. And I broke that chain, and my son broke that chain, this generational, issue that was impacting my entire history of my family tree.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard enough being a kid, you know. And so you decided to go and get into the military, and that whole world itself is just such a hardening experience, right? Like what you had to go through to be a Marine is something that most people aren't able to do. Like it's such a hard battle. I mean, I can't even relate because I've never done it, but some of the stories that you had about that resilience, like what was driving you, like how, like I know you wanted to prove your dad, but prove your dad wrong, like that you can do this, but like what was really driving you to do that, to get into the Marine Corps? Like what was that?
Well, it was a twisted sense of my getting my father's approval. There was part of that. I went into the Army first, but I got separated on a medical discharge just a week or 10 days prior to graduation because I had a pre-existing injury in my arm, and I didn't have any feeling in this part of my hand or any real strength, but I was able to hide out amongst of all the inductees, just at the AFI station and pass all the physicals, and they didn't really were paying attention. So I thought I made it in, but it caught up with me. And then they saw that I couldn't do push-ups except on my knuckle, and I couldn't do pull-ups because I couldn't grip with these fingers. And so they recognized it, and they separated me. And then they're just going home to my dad, and him not even, he's standing in the door, not even shaking my hand and not letting me back in our family home. It just pissed me off, and so I got the idea that a few months after, literally living in my next door neighbor's front yard and in a camper, what would it take to get back in if that was possible? And I went back and I talked to the recruiter, and they laughed. They're like, you already got separated on a medical. It's highly unlikely the medical board is going to even give you the time of day. And I'm like, so it's highly unlikely. It's not impossible. And they're like, it'd be next to impossible. And so I just looked at that as my possibility, because all my friends had felonies. They weren't going anywhere. And if I didn't get out of there, I was going to end up just like them. So I had, and plus I was really enraged at my dad. I didn't want to he would never abuse me again. And I was going to see to that. So I was able to go past my physical and actually get qualified to go back in the military. But instead of going in the Army, I went in the Marine Corps, and it was a big accomplishment to be able to get back in. But I had a rage problem. I got a retribution problem. There's a chapter in the book called Retribution is Far Beyond Rage. Like when you've been suppressed and you've been beat down and you've been abused, there's a level of retribution that is far beyond rage, where you want your abuser to pay. And so I went in because I was going to come back, and he would never hurt my family again. So that was part of my mentality. And I grew up in a bad neighborhood of Southwest Phoenix. And so always getting chased by groups of guys getting beat up. So I wasn't going to take their shit either anymore. So I went in with a vengeance, like I'm going to go learn how to take care of myself. And so that was a big motivation, trying to make my dad proud of me in a twisted way. I think every kid wants that. But on the other hand, I could care less about what he thought about me. So it was really kind of a confliction.
Do you ever think what you would have gone into if that wasn't a direction? Because it's crazy, right? Like you had this abusive dad that was so hard on you, but then you ended up going down this road, and now look who you are now, what you're able to do. It's like, it's hard sometimes when we go back because we're like, well, if I didn't go through that, like, would I have ended up, at the same place, and would I had as much of a rich experience of life and growth? But you would never want to wish that on somebody. But it's always, you look back and you're like, shit, which path would I have taken? Do you ever wonder like what that would have looked like what interested you at that age that maybe you would have gone differently if that didn't happen?
Well, again, Glad's wisdom parallels my entire life to this day and into the future. Like the pearls of wisdom that she shared with me that I didn't understand carried with me throughout my lifetime. And we get to talk about it until she passed away when I was in my 40s. And so another thing that she shared with me that got me through the worst is she said she'd researched all the major religions in the world. And she said that she narrowed it down to a common thread. When you take out the extreme aspects of every religion, God is love.
God is love.
And I'm like, wow, okay, that sounded reasonable. And here's the thing. It only takes one adult of healthy character to influence a child for life.
Yeah.
And that's what she knew she was doing. She said, God is love. And she said, do you believe that? And I said, and I really couldn't respond. But when I did, I said, it may be true for you, but it's not for me because I'm afraid all the time, And so no, I don't see it. And so she said, well, someday you'll discover that God is love and that you'll find your purpose. Really? Do you have a purpose? I'm like, well, I think I'm too young to have a purpose, and I'm hungry. She says like, okay, well, let's go get something to eat. So she really treated me like this young boy who was trying to figure it out. But those nuggets stayed with me. But the most interesting thing is throughout my life, when I've gotten in the worst situations life-threatening situations, just before the moment of impact when bad things are happening, I cannot tell you how many times I ask myself, if God is love, why is this happening to me? And
Right.
Glad was in my mind. I'm like, Glad, why is this happening to me? Like really, really catastrophic things, for any normal person. And so that curiosity, why is this happening to me, didn't come to me till I was 52. And I didn't have 1 ounce of joy in my life. Not really any fulfillment. I had accomplishments, and I was just like, I was on a pursuit, like I heard like in Africa, when the sun rises up and you're on the plains, and whether you're the hunter or the hunted, you better be running. And that was my life, my whole life. Like I was always running away from my upbringing and bad things and running towards who I wanted to become and how I wanted things to be different. So each are forms of massive power and motivation. You're either moving away from what you don't want or you're moving towards what you do want. And her wisdom really helped me make sense of it. And to kind of round it out, I finally understood after doing a bunch of plant medicine journeys and some Native American vision quests that the purpose of my suffering was so I could develop empathy to understand the pain of others, so I could relate to the pain and the suffering of others. And that all made sense all of a sudden. Like there's a reason for my suffering, and now I get it. I don't suffer anymore. I suffer. If I didn't know better, I could see that I had long-term depression, anxiety, trauma, lots of things. But I suffer so little. When I see it, I'm able to pop out of it. I don't spend time there anymore. But it occupied a lot of space for most of my life.
Yeah, that part really landed with me. I remember I was listening to your book. I was riding the bike, and I remember hearing that about you getting that vision about God, essentially bringing adversity, challenges to you, so that you can see empathy in other people, you can feel it. And that really landed with me because sometimes, and people that listen to the show, we've heard all kinds of different stories. And it's always like, oh yeah, I mean, it's growth, it's for growth, all these, adversity is to bring you to the next level. You hear these different reasons why adversity happens. But then when hearing that really made a lot of sense because, oh yeah, you actually develop more empathy for people, for yourself, for other people. And then you're able to understand and relate and have more compassion. And it's so beautiful. And I never looked at it like that before. I may have felt it, but that really landed for me. So that part itself, man, thank you for that, because that was like one of those golden nuggets that I think a lot of people, all of you listening, like, think about that. All of the shit you've gone through in your life, how much empathy have you been able to, receive from that and see in others? And it's a powerful, powerful lesson.
Well, it is. And, I keep harkening back to Glad's wisdom. And she said, pay attention to the random people you seem to meet by chance, because often they are the messengers that are here to teach you the most.
Yeah.
So she embedded into me an innate curiosity of, no matter what I'm going through, I get a flat tire, who am I supposed to meet? I mean, and they appear, these magical helpers.
Yeah, and it's great that you had that open mind, because most kids, even not being abused, wouldn't be as open as you were to see those things, right? Like, the fact that you remembered that stuff and it landed is pretty awesome, man. To be able to know that she impacted you so much that it literally carried you through your life. And you did. And you talk about these different people or messengers that come, and when you're when you're transitioning out, how you were introduced to personal development. And that's always interesting too, because there's always this point, because I like to ask people, I'm like, yeah, but when did things switch? Like, when did you start to, like, you're going through this shit, you're in this program, and then all of a sudden you read a book or something, and it was really interesting because somebody was telling you about that. Tell us a little bit about that story, how that unfolded, like what how that person sort of came into your life, and then you went down that personal development road a little bit.
Yeah, sometimes messages are only in your life for minutes. Like, I bumped into a guy in Okinawa, Japan at a USO 2 weeks before I was getting out of the Marine Corps. And we were overly confident. We Marines maybe aren't always the toughest, but man, they sure have the biggest egos, because they build you. They build this galvanized sense of, you got a lineage, you have to memorize the history of the Marine Corps. Like,
Yeah.
you just personify what it is to be a Marine. Okay. And it's overconfident, and you need to be motivated to run towards machine gun fire, so it's crazy.
Crazy, man. It's
So here we
crazy.
are, we're sitting in this USO, and we're drinking a lot of beer, and we're getting really loud. And this warrant officer, a warrant officer is a guy who was enlisted, went back to school, came back in as an officer. He's watching us, the ridiculousness of our conversations. And when I went to get another pitcher of beer, I pulled up next to him, and he introduced himself and asked me if he could give me some advice. And I didn't realize at the time that my life was about to change. you know, he said, you're going to get out, and within a couple of days, probably not more than a week or so, you're going to realize that the world doesn't need another hard-ass Marine who could parachute out of helicopters at night and carry big, heavy packs. They just don't care. And you're also going to notice that the world is exactly the same as when you left, but you've changed. And I kind of said that, yeah, since I left as a kid, the only difference is they're still doing the same thing, but they've gotten pudgier, and they got facial hair. All my friends have kind of grown up a bit while I've been over here in the Marine Corps. And so He said, if I were you, I wouldn't be here drinking with my buddies. I'd be thinking more about what it's going to be like to be out in the world. He said, I'd go to the closest bookstore. I'd go to the self-help section, not the psychology section. And I'd look at all the spines of the books, and I'd pick some books that really jump off the shelf at me, and I'd start reading about who I'm becoming. You know, I had a rage problem, serious rage problem. I got in a lot of trouble in the Marines for my temper, right? And so I wasn't going to counseling. You have to tell somebody you're weak.
You wouldn't put up with people's shit. So part of that was like, it's respectable. But yeah, I hear you. You're like, so you wouldn't take shit from people, man.
It's to my detriment, and I see that now, but I wasn't going to go to counseling. There's no way. Yeah. My dad, when he came back from Vietnam, they made him go see a counselor. And the instant the counselor said, I understand how you feel, he called him an idiot, stood up and walked out the door. Right. So, but personal development, like this was an eye-opening thing. So I didn't really understand what he was saying, but he said, just take my word for it. And we talked for a couple minutes more. Don't remember what he said after that. I shook his hand. He walked out the door. I grabbed my buddy Chuck, and I said, hey, we got to go. We got to get out of here right now. So we jumped in a taxi, and I joke about it. They didn't have bookstores on Marine bases. So we had to go to the Air Force base, like 6 miles away over in Kadena. And I found the self-help section, and I picked up 3 books that jumped off the shelf at me. One was called Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. The other one was The Magic of Thinking Big by Schwartz. And the third was Psycho-Cybernetics by Maxwell Maltz, which I had to pick it up because it's such a weird title. Yeah. But then when I read the intro, this guy's a plastic surgeon who made people beautiful, but because of their low self-esteem, they couldn't see it. And that was me. I'm impeccable in this Marine Corps uniform, but inside I'm just all kinds of broken. It's something wrong with me, and my self-worth is just, it was a lack of internal cohesion. Like who I projected to others definitely didn't reflect who I was deep down inside. So that book spoke to me. So personal development became my path to recovery. And I've been paying that conversation forward thousands and thousands of times with strangers and people that I work with and that I help without asking anything in return, which by the way, the law of reciprocity has served me more than anything else. So when I was a little older, this will fit in line with these messengers and personal development. She shared with me the law of reciprocity, which is, number one, show up. A lot of people just don't do a good job of showing up, being present, 100%, or really, really being present when they're engaged, be there. Yeah. And number two, do what you say you're going to do. Not a lot of people do that. So number three is give a shit. Care about the outcomes for the person you're trying to help. And number four, ask nothing in return. That's what she meant by the law of reciprocity is if you exercise that in the giving, there's no agenda. There's no hooks where you need to get something from the exchange. And it took me a while to really understand this because I had a lot of bad things happen, like my son passing away. It transformed my life. Like it knocked me down. Like Otis Taylor has a song called "Live Your Life," and in the lyrics it says, "Death ain't gonna touch you in your heart. It's just gonna come on up. It's just gonna walk on up and knock you down." And that's what happened to me unexpectedly. And I became the wounded healer for 10 years after that, where I needed to adopt at-risk vets. I needed to work with people who are traumatized so I could move my pain. So these are other little strategies where it's okay if you're suffering to move your pain by helping others until you can figure it out. And over time, my trauma and my pain matured, and I grew and evolved through the worst parts of that process. And what you're left with over time is a real mixed sense of emotions about missing someone that's gone, but being thankful for the growth you've experienced because of it.
What, yeah, I mean, this is kind of related to that point. It's around the grief. It's there's no field manual for grief, right? There's no like one way. And it's such a mind fuck because each time that happens, it hits you differently. And you lost your brother, you lost your son, and they obviously are different. So I guess my question is like, how what was your process like? How did from the initial news to how you had to move through it, because some people can't handle that. I know that when we lost my younger brother, within a year, he just unraveled and ended up getting cancer. It was just that he didn't have the tools to be able to deal with the grief. That's my theory, anyways. And, you know, a lot of people think they have the tools, and then boom, they get hit with it and they don't know how to deal with it. So what did that look like for you? And what did you yeah, what did that look like for you? And kind of like, what's the process of grief to somebody that may be going through something similar?
Yeah, well, after talking with vets, at-risk vets for so many years, and my son, who was an at-risk combat vet, he did two deployments in Afghanistan. Um, I think Viktor Frankl's work, Man's Search for Meaning, is the book that he wrote.
Yeah.
He was a psychiatrist. I believe he's a psychiatrist. He was a mental health professional who was taken to Auschwitz or some of the, I think, two different concentration camps during World War II. They took his family away, and he knew they were dead. And then they ordered him to take off all his clothes and strip down. And then they told him to take off his wedding ring. And in that moment, he realized that the only control he had was how he was responding to how he chose to respond to his captors. And that seed grew into an oak tree. That seed created this whole mentality for him that got him not only through the concentration camps, but he started writing the manuscript for Man's Search for Meaning, and kept it sewn into his jacket lining. So all the concepts that you see and understand in his work were formed through a real crucible of life. And what I'm getting at is, in summary, what he's saying is there must be some meaning or purpose for what you've gone through, and it's up to us to find out what that is.
Mm.
We need to look in our lives and say, what meaning and purpose can I derive from my suffering? For the sake of why did this happen to me? And that really helped me become curious. I was still the wounded healer, and I still was really comfortable hanging out with really traumatized people. We were like the walking wounded, but we understood each other. And so for me, finding meaning and purpose through my struggles meant being of service to others. It was a big, simple, profound awareness that I needed to move my pain. I did have suicidal thoughts at one time. I did have like, my world is ended, right? And so you have to sit down and say, okay, what in the world can I do with my loss? The person that's not here, which is my son, what would he have me do? What would be the best thing I could do to honor him? So I started reframing, like my life is terrible. I started reframing, like, what would he be doing? What would he and I be doing together? What did we start out doing already? Like he was going to Syracuse University to get his master's in social work, and he was going to be a counselor for veterans, and we were writing programs and conceptualizing things. So I just pretty much continued on what he and I had started. And so I guess that's my biggest thing, is find some way of creating meaning and purpose. And if you can't figure it out, go find other people that you can relate to that are in your tribe that maybe are suffering, that maybe you could offer some way of assisting. Maybe it's just going and making lunch, for some people. Maybe it's sitting down and talking to them. Maybe it's volunteering, but really, really, while you're in this dilemma and trying to process what's going on, personal development, being around other people who are suffering, but they're showing up. They're trying to figure out how to make meaning of their own life. Like, I found a lot of solace in that. And then for me, men's work. I love doing men's work because it's honest. We aren't focusing on being impeccable because when you mix men and women together, there's always this level of impeccability where, we have to show up, and there's the alphas of the alpha kind of thing. But working with men, it's honest, because we can talk about shame. We can talk about suffering. We can talk about real violence and trauma. And that really, we can talk about shadow work. We can really get into, what does it mean to be a man? What does it mean to be in a relationship? So I don't know. Is that making sense?
Yeah. Yeah. There's a couple things there that I want to just put a stamp on the men's work. I want to come back to that. I just want to go back to what you said about something else, because the next thing will be the men's work for sure. I definitely don't want to forget that point. Why do you think, okay, this goes back to God is love, and this goes back to seeing the lesson in the adversity, in the loss. Why do you think people struggle with this so much? Why do people go into the victim mode where it becomes, why me? Why is God doing this to me? Why is that? Why are most people like that? Like, what is the driving factor of that? Because that's what I feel like the majority of our society is in most situations.
Well, I think if we had a definitive answer for everybody, it would be, the world would be a better place. But I can tell you from my own journey, I can't speak for other people, but I can tell you what I've seen most often in the people that I worked with. We create conclusions about what it is that our experiences mean to us. Like, I used to have a conclusion that there must be something wrong with me. Otherwise, why would my dad treat me like this? Why would I get in all this trouble? Why would all this violence happening? There must be something wrong with me.
Right.
So my mind did the only thing it's designed to do. The miracle of our mind is to gather evidence to support whatever conclusion I was focusing on. And then that evidence would freak me out and cause me to be nervous, because there must be something wrong with me, because I have a lot of evidence of all these things. And they would cause me to show up in the world and behave in a way that was kind of frenetic and nervous. And in my neighborhood, if you show up frenetic and nervous, predators, they recognize that. So,
right.
So I don't see bullying. I was terrorized by groups of guys.
Yeah.
So my conclusions were the problem. I was gathering evidence to support unresourceful conclusions, and I was showing up as nervous, and then people showed up around me in a way that was very predatory, which reinforced the conclusion that something's wrong with me. Okay, this isn't my work. This is from Maria Nemeth. She wrote a book called Mastering Life's Energies, and she is there's a chapter in the book about Maria, and I talk about how I've discovered that something must be wrong with me. There's something wrong with me was really just ruling my life. So I think if there's one thing I could help people with, is conveying that same message that I was given by Maria, which is change your conclusions, change the internal questions that you're asking about yourself. And in my case, I was able to say, what am I supposed to be learning from this when I got in really bad situations? Well, I learned that I pretty much created a lot of them. There was some way that I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I could have made better choices. But my point is, my evidence gathering process evolved because the question evolved. So instead of
Right.
something's wrong with me, what am I supposed to be learning? All of a sudden, I started realizing, what am I supposed to be learning? I'm not that little kid anymore. I'm not that scared kid. Okay. I went in the Marine Corps. I mean, I'm a different person. I'm a learner. I could learn things. And so I started showing up in the world. My behavior was more curious and relaxed and engaging. And people started showing up that were curious, relaxed, and engaging. And it reinforced the conclusion that I'm a learner. I know how to learn. So that's just a real quick example. Like, go no further than man's search for meaning. What purposes are for my suffering? And then the four boxes, as it's called. If you buy Mastering Life's Energies, page 99 to 111, it explains this really well. It's not something I created, but I point at good tools, and that's one of the better ones.
And yeah, I mean, that's so important, because I feel like isn't that really the thing? It's like, what tools do you have that you can use when shit hits the fan so that you can respond properly? So you can, that is really the factor, right? In life, it's like, what's the difference between somebody and somebody else? Well, if everything was easy for everybody, you wouldn't be able to tell. But really, it's like, how does this person respond to a difficult situation? It's like, how do they look at it? How do they see it? Right? It's so
Yeah,
interesting, right? And it's like these things, that's such a great way to say it. Like, it's 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 just like looking at it and not making the meaning about you like you're something's wrong with you, right? It's not like
right.
bad boy or bad girl. It's like, we have to almost see from a wider lens, like, hey, maybe this isn't working out right now because it's actually serving us long term, right? Like, maybe there could be there's other factors in. And I feel like that can be really helpful. And it's just so important to have that perspective in those tools, because, man, it's so easy. And I can it's no matter how much work that I do, I'll still go back to those moments of like, why, poor me. But the difference is, and you can probably agree, it happens, but it's like, how long before you bounce back to the driver's seat, right? Where you're like, oh, okay,
That's a
I
really good point, Lance. That's a really, really important point, because you're asking what can you do when you get triggered. So I'll be real brief, but I actually developed a process for myself. And by the way, I say this probably too often. I'm not here to teach anybody anything. I'm really not interested in being seen. I'm not a teacher, because I'm in this with you every day. I get triggered just like anybody else who suffers from trauma and loss and all this stuff. But I've been able to learn how to recover, like, quickly, like so quickly that I can self-regulate and I can manage my life. Okay. Because I would spend so much time being triggered that my life was consumed with self-medicating. Like, I smoked weed my whole life, and now I can't smoke weed. I didn't like myself. I had a lot of self-loathing, and I had a lot of violence. And so I would smoke weed to check out, but then I get really paranoid. But I'd rather be really paranoid and numb than vulnerable and exposed. And so I just had a terrible existence. And then the more I did the work on myself, with myself, I learned to like myself. And I couldn't even say love myself, because that was too soft,
right.
right? The more I learned to love myself, the more I realized that I don't need to smoke weed, because I like who I am. I like who I've become, and I don't want to check out. Same with too much alcohol, same with lots of things. But what I developed was a 3-step process when I get triggered that changed my life. Number one, I didn't really recognize when I was triggered. I just got triggered, and I would start self-medicating. I just start workaholism, athletics, just sitting and ruminating, drinking, smoking weed. I was just really susceptible to self-medicating, whatever you want to call self-medicating, but anything to check out, anything to go numb, not deal with what's going on. But then I realized, that when I got triggered, I could recognize that I'm triggered. Instead of being in it, I could pull back. I could zoom out instead of being full blown in it.
Yeah.
I could pull out and pop out of it and I could look at it. Like sitting in a theater, watching it up on a screen was really big for me. Like I'm not in
Yeah.
it. Okay. I'm not in the trauma. My heart rate's going like I'm now able to observe it. You feel my heart rate drop down a little bit. Oh, okay. I'm not in danger. Bad things happen. Our mind can revivify as if it's right now. So by observing it, number one, say to yourself, I'm triggered. Or say to the person you're with, hey, I'm a little triggered right now. But just let them know that I don't need any help. I can self-regulate. I'm responsible for me. But I really started noticing and taking responsibility. Wow, I'm triggered right now. And the more I did that, the more I realized that I'm not breathing. When I get amped up and I get triggered, I go from full-blown moving, full color, panoramic, like I'm talking to you right now, into this black and white tunnel vision. And I'm just zeroing in. All my resources are shutting down and I'm not breathing. It's like a suspenseful breathing, right? Yeah. And so I'm panicking, right? And so number one, recognize. Number two is take a deep breath. Like oxygen is the antidote for anxiety. So that's what a second thing I learned was some breathing techniques. In the military, they call it tactical breathing, where you breathe in for 5 through your nose, hold for 5, out for 5, hold for 5, in for 5. So I would go through this tactical breathing process. Like people in the military, they don't want to talk about yogic breathing and, you know, they want to talk about tactical breathing because it sounds like it's more relevant.
Yeah.
But learn how to breathe. And then the third thing was to focus on something more interesting. Focus on something. Like if you're focused on anger, you know, automatically, like your thoughts create the emotions you experience, and the emotions you experience create the chemical soup that your body operates in. You know, you're literally generating your body chemistry by what you think about and the emotions it's generating. Well, that's Joe Dispenza's work. You know a lot about that, you know, and so changing the focus of your attention. So recognize you're triggered, call it out, take a breath, get some oxygen, and then shift the focus of your attention. And in my audiobook that I did prior to this book, you know, I had this veteran focus on when his daughter was born, you know, and he's a hardcore vet and he's a hard man, you know, but the instant I started talking about when his daughter looked into his eyes for the first time and he noticed they were having that moment of connection, his whole physiology changed. His whole languaging is just, he softened up instantaneously. We were able to look at, wow, what just happened there? He's like, wow, that was really a moment. So this work is about watching your thoughts and not being in your thoughts and shifting the focus of your attention with the movies and the pictures and the things that are important to you. It could be your service dog, could be a kitten, could be somebody you love, but you change the focus of your attention. And so by doing this 3-step process, I was able to really quickly self-regulate. And I'll sum it up with saying, your life happens between your triggers. That's what I needed to discover, because I was walking around triggered all day long.
Oh man, that's so good. That's so true. Think about that for a second, right? Like your life happens between your triggers because there's always triggers throughout the day.
Yeah.
And
good and bad, by the way. They're positive triggers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you can like really get lost in that negativity. You can just fucking spiral. And all of a sudden the day is like, oh, everything sucks. I suck. I'm ugly. It's like becomes this like crazy catastrophic event. And it's like, whoa, how did this happen? How did I get here from that?
Right.
Isn't it? It's fascinating how that happens. Fascinating.
Spend way too much time in stinking thinking, right?
Yeah.
Next thing you know, you're making meaning of it. Like this means something, you know. Life is hard, but you know what? It's not.
Yeah.
It's kind of a contradiction in terms. If you focus on life is fucking hard, it's going to be fucking hard.
Right.
You know? And that part of it is, man, I'm always like that, or I'm always depressed. Are you really? Are you always depressed? Well, maybe not always. Okay, so you're not always depressed. So I'm constantly asking people to think about what you just said. You know, there's a part of you, sure, where you feel depressed, but does that represent who you are? Are you really depressed when you're having joy with your kids watching them play? Well, not really. Okay, so you're not always depressed, but you just said, I'm always depressed.
Mm.
So you can clean up your man, how you're showing up just by realizing, wow, there are times when I'm really depressed. What causes me to get triggered into depression? Now, that's a more resourceful way to look at it than I'm always depressed. So if I can set up and provision myself when I get triggered the next time to ricochet out of what would have been a depressive part of me, depressive state, into, wow, I see it.
Mm.
Again, all I'm really asking you to look at is, do you see it?
Yeah.
And how often does this theme come up where you're just generalizing things and making yourself feel like shit?
Yeah. And I feel like the more you become aware of this and do this work, the more you realize how powerful language is.
Yeah.
Like you catch yourself saying things like I know for myself, I'm like, no, you're not that. Come on. Like, the inner critic wants to say this, and then, the inner cheerleader's like, no, come on, man. You don't need to say that about yourself. It's like this dialogue that you have to learn to notice, because I see it all the time with people too. It's like, and it's like, man, don't say that about yourself. Like, don't say that. You're not that. That's like part of you that's feeling depressed. You're feeling sad. You're not that thing, and it's just amazing to watch, because sometimes somebody's language, you can see why they're in the position they're in because of the language. And if that's how they speak all the time, then that's what their dominating thought is. So it must be how they feel inside. And it's man, the language has so much more power than we give it credit for. People just say, oh yeah, I just say things, but you're saying things, but you have to realize, like, your words are powerful. They have power.
Yeah. For me, it was like I was in a box, but I was in a hamster wheel in the box. And
Yeah.
I was on this hamster wheel, right? Racing around, and just racing thoughts that would be relentless, that would be waking me up in the middle of the night, constantly telling me to be careful, watch out, this person's an idiot, all kinds of themes. So even if I got off the hamster wheel, I was still in a box. Okay. I had to really think about this internal vocabulary. I mean, Tony Robbins, he's a great, interesting work. It's transformational vocabulary, he calls it. Watch your TV. Watch how you are languaging to yourself,
Yeah.
and it will change the trajectory of your life. When you hear your kids saying things, they're typically repeating stuff you've said, and that really should sting anybody. Like, wow, I've got plenty of stories about that, but really, it's about watching your internal vocabulary. I used to have a pattern of saying, man, I'm a fucking idiot, because things would happen,
Yeah.
right? And I absolutely had to stop saying that. And I mean, there's just so much to this, just in this point right here, about changing the internal dialogue. And that's another reason why personal development of any sort, if you're an auditory learner, become addicted to audiobooks in self-help. If you're a reader, go on the internet and look up self-help. Look at, whatever flips your switch. Look for any title that just gets your attention and start reading about who you're becoming. That'll get you out of a negative state pretty quickly.
Mm. Yeah, it's essential. I don't know where I'd be without it either. I wanted to ask you something that just came up that I feel like is important, and it's around self-worth. I've talked about this a little bit in the last few episodes, and around self-worth and like scarcity mindset around, like, I'm curious for you, because you grew up in, very challenging situation, and then you did a lot of work on yourself. You were able to be successful in your life. And I guess my question is, like, first of all, in the men's work that you do you see as self-worth as being a major issue? And how does somebody start to create that worth within themselves? I guess that abundance, because that's a real thing. There's so much of that scarcity where that you could fall into, well, because it was hard or I didn't have a lot of money growing up, I've created this story that's just going to keep happening. And I'm curious how that looked for you because, you know, you were able to create a lot of success. So the work that you've done, what was the biggest, like what pushed the needle forward for that self-worth, that actual feeling of like, I'm worthy to be here. I'm worthy of this, and to attract that into your life. Does that make
And
sense? That question is kind of a big question.
it's such a, man, that's why I named the subtitle of the book, The Relentless Pursuit of Becoming Who We Are Meant to Be. And again, I just speak for myself, man. I look at it as we came into this world as a clean hard drive. We may have some genetic, issues, rarely, but it happens. But then we fill up the hard drive with all that shit that's happened to us. Okay. And so there's a really good book. I'm going to go off on a riff here a little bit, but it's a really good book by Oprah Winfrey. And it's called What Happened to You. And she co-narrates it with Bruce Perry, who's a world-renowned like child psychologist type of expert. And she's going through her life experiences. And what he's doing is stopping and talking about what part of the brain at that age was impacted with that traumatic experience. And so for me, learning about adverse childhood experiences was a huge eye-opener for me. It's called the ACEs scale. If you look up, there's a bunch of different websites, adverse childhood experiences. There's a website called truesage.com where you can actually take the ACEs survey.
Right.
And what it is, it's 10 questions about your childhood. And you answer yes or no. And based on the number of yeses you had, it creates it activates a whole international body of research that has been conducted over many decades, that if you answer 4 yeses out of 10, basically your chances of onset long-term diabetes, hypertension, suicide, alcoholism, drug addiction, domestic violence, divorce, is measurably higher if you get above a 6. If you get above a 6, it goes up exponentially, and statistically, someone can lose 20 years off their lifespan just because how much shit that they're carrying. Okay. And on a scale of 1 out of 10, I'm a 10. So what really got my attention is, bad things happen to me. Bad things happen to me, and I'm really working on looking into the shadows, like in shining a conscious light into what's not resolved and what I've been through, and making meaning of it, transcending it to where my life is good. My life is manageable. I have joy. I don't suffer anywhere to the degree that I used to. But because I was able to discover tools like the ACEs scale and the audiobook, What Happened to You with Oprah Winfrey, just one small example, once again, of personal development. Be a learner. Like, be curious. And when you're sitting back and you're in your cave and it's cold and it's dark and you're okay because you created it, I'm fine. Like, I've got a cave like that. Go walk around the block and put your earbuds in and put something on that's going to stimulate your mind and bring your focus of attention back to the possibility of who you're becoming. Because that part of you is only a part of you. When you're feeling stuck, when you're feeling traumatized, don't forget, that critical mind that's always telling you that something's wrong. It works for you, not the other way around. At some point when you were traumatized and some bad things happened, your critical mind jumped in and took over and said, shut the fuck up. I can handle this, right? You're obviously not able to handle this. And then that takes control. And for most of us, that becomes our ego. It becomes our identity. But that's not really who we are. It represents that bad things have happened, but it represents the conditioned self also known as the ego. And it doesn't like to be threatened, doesn't like to be harmed or encroached upon or give up any ground. And so that's a whole other body of work. But when you can start transcending your trauma, and you can start working with your ego and working with that traumatized self, that part of you, without it feeling threatened, you have the possibility of transforming your awareness about who you are and who you can become. Because it's no longer saying, sit back, shut up, I got this. There's a movie with Ed Norton where he plays a person on death row, where he's really good at playing this traumatized version of himself who can't comprehend like anything about doing anything violent. And then this other side that comes out and will just pin you against the wall and threaten your life. Right? That's kind of like the rational, reasonable mind versus the critical mind.
How much do you think that your the discipline that you learned in the Marines and the Army had as a factor later on at using that discipline in your development? Because there is a certain amount of work that needs to be done to be successful. And if you don't have discipline, it's very difficult to be able to make progress. And I'm just curious, like, how much you see that aspect of that discipline of, like, it must have been rigid, but at the same time, it must have served you in a way that, a lot of people maybe that didn't have that may not, like someone that doesn't have that disciplined kind of, I don't want to say like forced into them, but there has to be something great that comes from doing that kind of discipline work, like in the Army, right? Did you say that has helped you a little bit, or what? What do you unpack that a little bit?
The Marine Corps transformed me into somebody who felt pain and gave up, into somebody who could learn how to take the pain and harden up, right? And then once you harden up and you know that you can handle it, then my fitness levels just exploded to a whole nother level. So there's that aspect of it.
Yeah.
But I was also the most unruly, incorrigible youngster and young man. And I didn't know I had a rage problem and a problem with authority until I got off the bus in Marine Corps boot camp. And the first thing they tell you is get on the yellow footprints. All these painted yellow, hundreds and hundreds of yellow footprints. And they just tell you to shut your mouth, get on the yellow footprints, and stand there until we're ready to do what's next. And so I don't like to be told what to do. Okay. And I had a problem with authority. And boy, go in the Marine Corps if you have a problem with authority. I got in a lot of trouble because of that non-conforming. I figured out I was a non-conformist.
Yeah.
But I also volunteered. I also got into a really awesome unit where we get to go to parachute school and we get to do a lot of stuff, and so I was able to be fortunate to be able to get into something really unique, and that it really did a lot for my self-worth. But I always had this need for autonomy, and I could not be controlled. My biggest thing was I needed to be in control, and I didn't like to be controlled.
Yeah.
So, like we talked about that, I came across a behavioral assessment tool that changed the trajectory of my life. I met two messengers who introduced me to a tool that was used back in World War II to separate bomber pilots from fighter pilots and who should go to what school. And they told me that when I did this little simple survey, here's the thing, your need to control conflicts with your need to not be controlled. Does that make sense to you? And I'm like, say that again. And it explained all the disciplinary problems that I had.
Yeah.
So I was able to use that in my life to then start saying, how do I direct this force of nature? And everybody has a superpower. I found some of mine.
See, I can relate with that, but then I hated having a boss, but I also liked having a boss because then it would like keep me. Sometimes it's like, yeah, just tell me what to do so I can do it. But then I'd be like, fuck, I don't like having a boss. It's like but then you have to step into, if you don't want that authority, you have to be the authority yourself.
Well, let's define that. like you, I think what I'm saying is I really like bosses I respect and that
Yeah.
respect me.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I'll just do anything for them. But if I don't
Same.
respect them, and if they're not treating me with respect, then then they know it. You know, I just won't respond. I'll do things my own way. I'm a lot more mature now, but I can see back in my younger years, you know, that limited my potential because I was so sensitive to being disrespected and overmanaged.
Mm.
That was my thing. So that's what big thing for me to work on, and that's really transcended a way. It's no longer my presenting life problem.
Where do you see? I want to go back to this point about men's work. Where do you see the biggest issue in men today? Like, because you see it all over the internet, you see people's opinions about men, and you know, I feel like a lot of men are struggling, and I think what the work with men is so important. But where do you see from the work that you've done the biggest issue right now with men?
I don't think most men know it's even available. I mean, we're getting to the point now where there's a tipping point, and there's a lot of organizations out there. You know, if you just Google men's transformational work, there are tons of really, really brilliant men who've done their work who are now leading retreats. You know, I think it's a new frontier. I think it's just starting to mature. There are some really old established men's organizations like the Mankind Project. You know, I went through that, 15 years ago. Um, and all the founders are getting up in years, but now there's a younger generation of men who really went through a lot of shit in their early teens with drug addictions and alcoholism. And now they're in their late 20s, 30s, and they're super mature. They know their stuff, they know their work, and they're doing really good work. And so I would say be curious, because you just got to be able to get out of your own way and look at yourself honestly, and having other men talk about their vulnerabilities, and to be so raw and so transparent about it, you can learn vicariously about what's going on for you. That was an important part for me. And then the plant medicine work, which is probably a whole other program. But the plant medicine work with men was the most important transformational work in my existence, because I was able to transcend my sense of self, my ego, my conditioned way of being, and go so far beyond thought into pure awareness that I could see myself, I could see my suffering, and I could transcend that. And I was able to find a place for me that was not just the absence of suffering, but not even the possibility of suffering, not even the possibility of trauma. And when I was able to reach that place, I was able to tether myself there and really bring that back into my daily waking hours. And the more I don't do a lot of plant medicine at all anymore, but what it really did was it popped me open to where I could see that I wasn't my trauma. Bad things happened, but it's like soul retrieval. I was able to go back and find that essence of who I really am before everything happened, and hold in perspective that bad things actually happen, but it doesn't represent who I am really, really deep down. So the personal development work is where it started, and then maturing into Native American rituals and Vision Quest was very helpful. And then today's day and age, ketamine, you can have it legally prescribed. Yeah. It only lasts about an hour.
It's amazing.
It takes you completely out of your thinking mind, and it puts you into this pure awareness where it's a magical experience. It's safe. And then there's all sorts of other types of medicines, plant medicine work that are done with groups of men. And I prefer men's work.
Yeah.
Because when you're in the plant medicine, it's too easy to get confused between the feminine and the male. So I really like just keeping it super clear that we're here to work on us, and there's no one in the environment we have to look impeccable for. You just need to be focusing on who you are. So men's work for me, there's lots of retreats where people take you through a process, and there's a lot of shadow work where you get to address the parts of yourself that are really dark that you never talk about, but are like the ACE scale. A lot of that comes up where you can look at childhood abuse. Like a lot of the veterans work that we do, it's surprising when we do medicine work, how often childhood traumatic experiences are what are coming up for them, even more so than combat.
Mm.
They can't resolve a lot of those kinds of things.
Did you have a lot of fear when you were going into like ayahuasca? For those of the listeners, the plant medicine you're referring to, you've done a few, but ayahuasca is kind of what you're. Did you? Yeah, the reason I ask is because this is kind of like a personal question that I may as well ask because I think people will be curious. There's still fear in me when I sat with ayahuasca. I don't know if I fully like I went and I had major experience, but there was still a fear of like completely, taking that extra cup and just completely going and this even with mushrooms, right? There's this fucking fear in me that is like I know that once you get into that world, it all goes away, but it's like that in between stage, that fear, even like doing vision quests. I'm like, I know the outcome. I listened to your story and I'm like, in the book, I'm like, man, I've been thinking about doing this, but it's like this fear that I think most people can probably relate to is like that, first of all, for you, what is that fear? Like, how does that show up? And how did that show up in the space? And how did you deal with it? Because this is what most people are struggling with that I hear
I
from.
was terrified, man. I was
Yeah.
fucking terrified about losing control because there
Yeah.
is a supreme intelligence outside of our conscious awareness that is present and it's real. And once you get a sense of this, the beauty of it and the non-judgment of it and just this loving, infinite sense of pure awareness, I couldn't surrender to it. I did 19 ayahuasca journeys. Okay. And here's the funny thing is I just soldiered through them because typically you're supposed to purge, which is part of the spiritual experience is just
Yeah.
purging and getting rid of, ejecting bad things from your system, psychologically, somatically, physically, spiritually. Um, but I wasn't going to be controlled. I couldn't release control to something I didn't understand. And I wasn't going to do it. I got a lot of transformation out of it because, like I said, I saw my suffering. I was able to find myself in a place where I wasn't that. So I got all that. But then I realized about my 18th retreat, I'm like, I need to purge. That's my problem. I'm just too much of a control freak. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to go do this I'm going to go do another ceremony, and I'm going to purge. So I go there with this big intention, like I'm going to purge. And I sit out in the courtyard away from everybody else with my finger down my throat for about an hour and a half, trying to vomit, trying to throw up. Please, I'm here to surrender. Right. I mean, and then what happened was it didn't happen. But then I got this really deep gurgle in my stomach.
Oh yeah.
And then my digestive tract just started churning. And I ran to the bathroom and I had such a forceful experience, man, of purging out the other end that it literally pulled everything out of my pores. I was there for like 45 minutes. Just I came out of it like a shiny new penny, right? There was just like this, it purged a different way, and it's exactly what I needed. And then ayahuasca is always called grandmother medicine. It's also called grandmother. And so grandmother and I had an agreement that I didn't need to come back. I was good. I didn't need any more ayahuasca journeys. And I was so profound, a clear agreement that that's what I needed. I needed to surrender the need for control and just let it go. And for me, that was a cathartic experience where I could physically feel like somebody vomiting, throwing up as part of the ceremony. I could feel that that's exactly what I needed. I needed to get rid of all these holograms of trauma that were all just messed up and blocking me.
Man. Yeah. That experience with ayahuasca. It's just each night is different too. It's like,
Yeah.
for those of you listening, like, it's, you think this is the beautiful thing about it, is like, this is the, you got to release control, right? And what I found, my lesson was like, oh, I had one night I thought I could predict the next. And, or, oh yeah, well, the next, like, I have this predictability. And she's like, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. You can't predict. You think you know? Okay, well, I'm going to show you something. And you're like, okay, okay, I get it. I surrender. It's like, it's like, as soon as, even in the space, like when you're in it, you're like, you start to get cocky, and then she'll humble you, and then sometimes you get a little scared. She's like, just surrender. And then you're like, okay. It's like this constant humble effect. And you're like, okay, I get it. I get it. Okay. I understand. It's like lesson after lesson after lesson. And then you take it in real life and you're like, oh shit. This is what this means. This isn't just sitting here and drinking medicine. This is life. This is
Yeah.
life that I'm learning about. Because then you just walk into real life, you're like, oh shit, I get it now. I get what that meant in the medicine space in real
Right.
life, right? It's
Yeah. It was for me, even though I didn't purge, I thought I was soldiering through it, and I wore it like, okay,
yeah.
no, I've never purged. Right. But what I was doing each time is that first journey, I found my joy. Right.
Yeah.
Like one of those little Russian dolls. I kept finding that there's a crusty little center underneath each time I popped open this transformation. And then I found that I really had a concept that my joy is in that little tiny pod in the very beginning, but it's being guarded by this magma. Like, why would magma be guarding my joy? And this is the kind of shit that was going on in my head. Right. But it was able to just transcend all that to where I could find this place where there was an absence of suffering. It was soul retrieval for me. It was so refreshing that I found my joy. And then each time I did my journey, I went right back and I expanded this place of joy, and had I not found that, I wouldn't be where I am now. I wouldn't be just like, there's so much chronic dissatisfaction on every level in my life. Nothing was good enough. No one was good enough. And I was just so internally dissatisfied with myself. If I just needed to work all that stuff through. And when that all kind of just smoothed out and all that stuff went away, my negative self-talk diminished dramatically. I was able to start focusing more realistically on, like, who am I really becoming? And finding my joy was really profound. I mean, that more than anything was the reason why I wrote and published the book, because there is so much more on the other side of our suffering.
Joy. So joy, what is joy? What is that word mean? It means fulfillment to you? Like, what is, because you
It's
say it.
self-love. It's
Yeah.
self-love.
Yeah.
Joy is like, I really, really am. I love my ability to help others. I love who I am being in the world. I've been through a lot, and I constantly have to play, maintenance, so I don't go into my thinking mind. But when you experience a sense of joy, things happen in your life, like that law of reciprocity. Joy asks nothing in return. And the more I spend time in a place where I like myself, I'm not my history. I have a lot of experiences. Okay. They serve me every day, but they don't master me. I find that the most wonderful people come into my life, and the ones who aren't so wonderful, I have exercised. We talked about this word, discernment. Discernment. I'm not mean to people, but if I find that something's not serving me, it's not really good for me, then I just move nicely away from it, and I just focus on who I'm becoming and the people I want to surround myself with. And which is probably what I would say in closing, that, Jim Rohn, who was Tony Robbins' first mentor, I was listening to one of his books called Take Charge of Your Life, and a couple of others. And he said two things to me that to me, right? I'm listening to this audiobook, but he's speaking to me.
Yeah.
I had to pull over and I had to memorize like this one quote. He said, you must carefully examine the credentials of those who wish to enter the place in your mind where your thoughts are formed.
Oh, man.
And I had to think about that. You must carefully examine the credentials of those who wish to enter the place in your mind where your thoughts are formed. And up until that point, I was just so heavily influenced by people in general and people who weren't the healthiest, who didn't have my best interest. They were working on their own shit and they were trying to enroll me into theirs. And so I just started really paying attention. And then the second thing that I memorized from Jim Rohn's work was the 3 types of association. Number 1, disassociation. If people are toxic, you got to get them out of your life. But number 2, limited association. What happens if they're family and you got to see them at Christmas? Well, then limit your association. And if they don't get it, tell them, you're not going where I want to go. I feel when we talk, or if you ever want to kind of focus on something different, then I'll talk to you more. But for right now, I got to limit my association with you, and be responsible for you and be willing to say that to somebody if they are persistent. Why aren't you calling me back? Okay. And then the third type of association is expanded association. Go find people that have the attributes, the qualities in their life that you would want to have and what you would want to further develop, and take them to lunch and talk to them about what you see in them. Because the reason why you recognize those qualities in them is because you deep down recognize them inside yourself. You just haven't cultivated them yet. So just with those 2 pieces of information, I was able to transform and change the trajectory of my life. Okay. Just by the people I was hanging out with. So these are nuggets. They aren't my nuggets. I'm really big about giving credit where I learn from and who I learned them from, and pointing people in the direction. Like in my book, most of the chapters are about, go read this book, go listen to this book, right? Go to this experience. I have a synthesis that's my writing, but I really enjoy writing about great thought leaders that have impacted my life.
That's what I like about you, man. You're very humble. You have a lot of wisdom. You may not give yourself as much credit for, because very humble. And dude, I'm just so glad that we, connected, and, the conversations we've had, and this was just so powerful. Your book is amazing. And, I truly, you guys listening, like, I recommend you grabbing this book, because it is such a fucking awesome journey. And there's so many nuggets in there, and it's just real, raw, honest. And dude, thank you. John, thank you so much for coming on, man, because when people hear you and hear you talk, and just, how humble and real you are, it's like people, they're going to love this book. And I'm sure they really enjoyed this episode. So thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with us.
Man, I tell you, Lance, it's been great, especially the fact that you took the time to really listen and digest this work before we actually have a conversation. We had lots of conversations, but it's difficult to understand the nature of this work until you've actually experienced it. And then it's made this conversation different than an interview. This has been a real conversation where there's been back and forth, and I'm really excited about like who you're becoming, and how this work may be impacting you.
I appreciate it. And, like I said, like we said earlier, people come into your lives for a reason. And, I'm definitely learning a lot already. There's so many things, and I'm excited for people to grab this book. And before we sign off, maybe give them a little bit of what you're working on, where we can find you, and obviously, be the dawn in the darkness, the relentless pursuit of becoming who we are meant to be. You can find that on Audible, Amazon, where else?
Yeah, harvestingwisdom.com.
Right.
I bought that domain back when the internet first was born, and I didn't know what I was going to do with it, but I thought it'd be something great. So harvestingwisdom.com, you can get a sense of my first audiobook called Transitioning Veterans, How We Get in Our Own Way and What to Do About It. And You can listen to that one if you're a veteran or just want to listen to that one. Go to transitioningveteransbook.com. And then under the audiobook preview, you can listen to the whole hour and 20-minute audiobook for transitioning vets.
Yeah. Which is super important. Like, what you doing? And yeah, man. What about so you're on LinkedIn as well?
LinkedIn, yeah, J.H. Parker.
Cool.
And I'm not a big social media guy, but I know it's necessary. So I'm just kind of getting into spreading the word. But my hope is that just good people are going to read and listen to this, and they're going to refer it to others. And I'm not looking to do consulting. I don't need to do speaking engagements. I don't want to do a lot of coaching and consulting. It's not really where my head's at. I'm really focusing on writing transformational work from here on out.
Awesome. All right, man. Thank you so much, everybody. Make sure to grab a copy. And again, thank you so much, John. This was awesome.
All right. See you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody. Hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Such a powerful conversation. John has so much value and insight into so many different layers. And that's why we connect so well, is because, you know, although our journey's been different, it's similar in a lot of ways. And I can really resonate with him and just enjoy having conversations with him. And as you guys can see, you know, that was a real genuine conversation about the things that are just so important, I believe, in the landscape that we're living in now. And it's so important to have these conversations. So I hope you guys took away some golden nuggets and got some notes. And make sure you go grab the book. Be the Dawn in the Darkness. The Relentless Pursuit of Becoming Who We Are Meant to Be. Think about that title today. And think about what your takeaways were from this episode and apply them in your life. If you guys aren't subscribed to the podcast yet, make sure to do so wherever you're listening. We're also available on YouTube, and all the information to John and his book, he goes by J.H. Parker, is all below in the show notes. And I highly recommend grabbing this. And I listened to it on audio. It was great. And I really, really enjoyed it. So much love, everybody. Stay safe. Be strong. We'll catch you next time.